Hey everyone, my name is Friendzoned and welcome to the 8th episode of Friendzone Produces. Today I'm going to talk about my track Expatriation. It's available in the description, you can have a listen to it before you jump into this walkthrough. It's an IDM track, so there's a lot of things to talk about. I'm only going to talk about the most interesting things that you could perhaps apply in your productions too. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So there's nothing too interesting about the beginning of the track. There is something that I want to talk about during the first drop though. Those are the main chords played by a super saw. And they sound nice, but I wanted to sort of add a bit more detail to them. And what I did is that I added those fills right here. And what those are, they're basically just like a saw wave, but I wanted their character to change over time so that it doesn't always sound the same. So what I did is that I just pasted the same chords and modified them a bit here. Then I first started with having an arpeggiator playing so that one note would be played at a time. And what's interesting is happening down there with this LFO tool right here. So this LFO modulates a whole bunch of stuff. First and foremost, it modulates the release right here of the oscillator. So if the LFO value is high, the release will be longer, and if it's lower, it will be shorter. And that sort of changes the character of the sound and how long it lasts. Then it also modulates the frequency of this auto filter right here, which is itself modulated each time this chain 2 channel is activated. I think it happens usually when the kick hits. And what this does is that the cutoff goes down and then the filter opens up after 118 milliseconds. Lastly, there's also this send right here that is modified with the same LFO. And so this send right here defines how much of the sound that is coming out of this track goes towards the short reverb channel that I have down there. And all of those together, they create something more interesting than having just one saw wave playing random notes, because the character of the sound is changing. Next, I want to talk about the way into the second drop. There's this little fill that sounds like this. And I think it sounds pretty nice, and I wanted to explain how it came about. So during the entire pre-drop section, I have this melodic line playing. And I knew I wanted to use this da-da-da-da sort of rhythm and sound as a way into the drop. I layered a few things one after the other. The first layer, maybe the easiest one to explain, is this one. It's just like a saw wave made in Serum with an OTT. I also added this sound, just as a nice filler. And what's interesting happens in this channel right here. You can hear that it plays the same melody as it was presented earlier in the lead section. But the sound is a bit different, and I'll explain how I reached this sound. So it all happens in this channel right here. If I turn off all the processing, it sounds like this. So pretty much like nothing. But the magic happens mostly in the vocoder section here. The in vocoder channel is right above it, and it sounds like this. It's just like a rendering of the previous lead section. And the vocoder in external mode can take an audio from this track specifically. So the sound that you just heard, like this weird sample, will be sort of modulated by the in vocoder channel. And that is going to give it this melody. I also added another vocoder to add a bit more noise to it, and I made it crispier with a bunch of effects. And then I simply took this sample, messed around with the transients, and decreased a bit the value here when preserving the transients in the warp mode beats. So by doing this, you can have a more chopped up version of the sample in a way. And if all of this plays with the sub bass, I think it sounds pretty cool. During the second drop, there's something interesting happening in the fills here. So you can hear that all of those sounds are basically made of very short loops playing over and over again, and that creates those interesting rhythm patterns. So the way I did this is that I had a sound design session and I just recorded a bunch of drums and they sounded like this. And then I wanted to include at certain points in the drop those fills. And there's a very simple way to do this in Ableton. Say you want to include an element from here to there, right? So you want this to play for this amount of time. There's something very simple you can do in Ableton to create this sort of looping effect. You just go down there and you click on loop. So that creates a loop that you can see down there. And then you simply decrease the length of the loop until the desired amount. And from this point on, you can just move this cursor around and it will create lots of different rhythms. So this is basically how I created the entire fills section of the second drop. Lastly, I want to talk a bit about the outro. It's a very, very dreamy outro. The first thing that I want to talk about is this bells patch down there. It sounds like this. So let me unfreeze this for a sec and explain a bit what's happening. So those are the two main chords that I wanted this arpeggio to play. They look huge because I wanted it to go like throughout the entire chord from low to high. And I wanted the notes to start as being very sparse and then gradually be played faster and faster. And this is made possible with the arpeggiator right here. It's in free mode and I just modulated the rate of the arpeggiator to increase over time. Now after this, I knew I wanted each hit to be either panned left or right of the spectrum. And it would have been a pain to automate a utility plugin. Each note is played exponentially fast. So it's just a mess to like program this yourself. So what I did is that I created this little patch. And I'm going to tell you how I managed to have the computer do this for me. So first and foremost, I threw a velocity plugin before everything. And I set it in fixed mode, 64 out high, random 64. And what this does is that the velocity of each note that is going to be played is going to be completely random. So it could be somewhere between 0 and 127, I think. Now, after that, I threw the expression control max device. And you can take the input from the velocity and map this velocity to something in your project. And I did this. So I mapped the velocity to this macro here, the speaker on macro. And let me explain what this does. So if I unmap everything and if I have a look at this instrument rack right here, I have one instance of operator that is hard panned right and the other one that is hard panned left. So these little icons here define whether this instance is turned on or off. So those are an on-off switch. What you can do with this instrument rack is that you can map those to the same macro, say macro 1, and modify the values here so that the minimum from the first one is 0 to the half of 127, let's say 64, and the other one starts from 65 to 127. What this does is that each time this knob here will be under 64, the first instance of operator will play. And each time it's over 64, the left version of the operator will play. So you can see here that it turns on and off as I move the little knob. From now on, you can probably understand that if we map the randomized velocity to this little knob here, each time a note will be played, then the velocity will be different. And the velocity will define if that note is played with the hard right operator or the right left operator. I thought this was a neat little trick to know that you could perhaps use in your productions. Perhaps the last thing I want to talk about happens in the FX section here, and I want to talk about those right here. So I wanted to have something similar to what I just explained beforehand, with some notes played very sparsely at the beginning and increasing in rate by the end of this chord. And to do this, I used a granular synth called Mangle. If I unfreeze this, you'll be able to see it. Here it is. So this is the Mangle. It's made by a company called Sound Guru. And the principle behind granular synthesis is that you would throw an audio sample into there, and then the synth would trigger what is called grains, and a grain is just like, basically just like a tiny bit of your sample playing. And you can modify, for example, the rate at which the grains happen so that they can either happen very, very sparsely or very quickly. You can also define the length of each grain. So if you say have one grain played each second and the grain lasts for half a second, you would have your sample played once every second and lasting for half a second, basically. And so the sample I threw in there was just a piano sample of the bigger chords that I showed earlier. And so if I play this one, it sounds like this. You can see the grains up here that are played. And you can see that the release of each grain increases over time as well as their rate. So this creates for a randomized selection of the part of this piano sample with an increased rate over time and an increased release over time. And this creates a very dreamy, sort of cloudy texture in a way. I then threw some reverb as well as a ping pong delay to make everything even dreamier, and that's how I ended up with those textures. So there you go, those are, I think, the most interesting tricks that I used behind my track Expatriation. I hope you found this video somewhat useful and that you'll be able to apply those tricks in your own productions. In any case, my name is Friendzoned and I'll see you next time.